Good afternoon, and happy holidays to everyone. My name is Courtney Battle, and I am the Executive Director of HAND. I just want to start by thanking everyone for joining us today for this Housing Indicator Tool Survey webinar. I would also like to thank everyone who has engaged with the HIT, worked with us to collect data or participated in any way. We truly could not do it without your partnership, and we're so grateful for you to join us today. I know that many of you are already familiar with the Housing Indicator Tool, or HIT for short, as you'll hear us refer to it today, and our annual process of gathering regional data to update that tool. But we wanted to do things a little bit different this year and provide an opportunity for everyone to get a refresher on the tool and just some background on how it came about, some highlights from the last year, and also give you an opportunity to have any questions answered about the survey that you may have. And everyone should have received a copy of that survey. If you have not, please do let us know so we can make sure that we get that over to you. So following my remarks, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Taylor Phillips, who is our policy director here at HAND, and she'll be sharing more details about the tool. For those of you who are unfamiliar with HAND, just also wanted to provide a brief overview of who we are and what we do. We are a membership collective that serves as a convener, educator, and activator for affordable housing and community development professionals in the Capital Region. And our members have a shared goal of creating and preserving affordable housing throughout our region. And so, our work really is focused on bringing our members together to strengthen those partnerships that they need to do the work, to building their capacity, making sure they have all the tools and resources they need, and the advocacy that we can accomplish as a region to drive progress on our housing goals. And that's really where the HIT comes in. And so with that, I will turn things over to Taylor for her to take it away from here. And again, appreciate everyone for joining us today and hope that you have a great holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here. Again, my name is Taylor Phillips, and I'm the policy director here at HAND. And in that role, I lead our policy and advocacy work, and a huge part of that is the Housing Indicator Tool. I'm excited to be here for another year of updating the tool. And as Courtney mentioned, whether you're new to the HIT or have been involved since the beginning, just very grateful to be in partnership with you as we work toward our shared goals of ensuring that everyone in the region, regardless of income or race, has the quality, affordable housing options that they need to thrive. And with that, I would ask Tiana, could you please bring up the slides? Awesome. Can we go to the agenda slide? Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the Housing Indicator Tool. We're going to hear from two amazing housing directors in the region who have participated in the HIT. They're going to tell us a little bit more about the value it's provided for them. And then we're going to get into this year's survey, and we'll have time for questions, and our amazing research partners at the Urban Institute will be with us to talk more about this year's survey. Okay, next slide. We can go to the next one since Courtney gave us a great overview of HAND. And so on the following slide, just a little bit of an overview of the Housing Indicator Tool, or the HIT, as we like to call it. And it is a platform intended to track progress towards meeting housing goals in the Capital Region. And what we feel really makes the HIT special, it's not only demonstrating how the region is collectively faring, but also how things are progressing at a local level. So in addition to data dashboards on progress on housing production and preservation goals, the tool also underscores different policies that make up a housing toolkit and how that toolkit is deployed in each jurisdiction. Another feature of the tool is that it links housing and racial equity and dives into racial equity focused policies and really trying to understand better and build a collective understanding of how housing has exacerbated the wealth and opportunity gap among Black and Brown communities. And finally, there are calls to action for each sector because everyone has a role to play in addressing the affordable housing crisis in our region. We can go to the next slide. And so in terms of the targets used in the tool and the methods of the tool, a few things that we think are really important and help make it, the first of its kind. And the first is around having specific price bands. So housing targets are broken down based on affordability by household income. So there's a granularity there. It's not one big regional goal, but granularity there in what the needs are by income. And next, there are jurisdiction level targets. So mentioned this before, but the HIT is really designed to be a regional tool that is driven by collective local action. And we think that regional and local view is incredibly important just with the scale of our housing affordability crisis. And finally, the last two, it's connected to locally produced forecasts. So the targets and the tools are based on locally produced demographic forecasts. So it's not new information that we are creating, but really using what we already know, that there is a severe shortage of housing that's affordable to low and middle income households, and really outlining what it would take to fill that gap. And finally, there's consistent data for all localities. So this enables us to have more consistent comparison over time across the region. And that's really critical if we want to be able to consistently track how we are doing and learning from each other and pivoting to address the need. And we're excited that there are 20 jurisdictions across the region since launching the HIT in 2021, and we're excited to keep expanding, and we're happy that this past year included jurisdictions in Baltimore, and we are excited to include more down in Richmond in the coming years. Next slide. So finally, how are people leveraging this tool? Exciting that folks across sectors are using it to understand, local context and housing needs in their jurisdictions, advocating to local officials on affordable housing goals, and also case making to gain support for housing-related policies and programs. And I think it really enables a cross-sector involvement. It's going to take work from everyone to solve this crisis. And with that, we can go to the next slide, and I will hand it over to colleague at Urban, Leah Hendy, to share more about progress made to date.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited just to go back. If you missed the launch event in April, I'm just going to share a couple quick slides with some of the highlights from that session and the last version of the HIT. If you go to the next slide. The Greater DC region established a goal in 2019 of producing about 25,000 units annually, about 14,000 of which should be affordable to households with incomes below 80% of AMI to meet all the needs of the projected increase in households over time. For the first time in the 4 years that we've been collecting data for the HIT tool, we were thrilled to report that jurisdictions in the DC region exceeded that annual production target and produced more units in 2022 than in 2021. Across the region, 6 jurisdictions, including Alexandria, Falls Church, and the city of Fairfax, all met their jurisdiction level production targets, and 5 jurisdictions were able to increase housing production in 2022 compared to 2021. If you go to the next slide, we had 5 jurisdictions participating in the HIT for the first time in the greater Baltimore region, which collectively produced about 5,550 new units in 2022, more than 60% of which were located in the city of Baltimore. And on the next slide, this number has varied from year to year, but last year when we looked at the share of all new units that committed affordable units represent, those affordable to households with incomes of 80% of AMI or less, we found in the DC region, about 10% of new units built were affordable, and in the Baltimore region, about 8%. Arlington County led both regions on this measure with 24% of all units built in 2022 that were affordable. And several other jurisdictions had shares ranging from 15 to 18%, including Montgomery, Fairfax County, and DC. The next slide. And we know that preservation is also a critical part of ensuring that there are affordable units across the region. In the DC region, jurisdictions preserved affordability for more than 2,000 units with existing subsidies and covenants. And Anne Arundel County also reported preserving more than 300 units. And 6 jurisdictions in DC region also track preservation of affordable housing that's not subsidized and reported preserving more than 2,600 units as now committed affordable. And then finally, for the looking across to future development on the next slide, across the DC and Baltimore regions, there were 36,500 units in some stage of development, with almost 9,400 under construction and 27,000 in the pipeline. DC, Baltimore City, and Fairfax County have the most units under construction, while DC, Montgomery, and Baltimore City have the most in the pipeline. On the next slide, we track policies, 21 different policies right now for local jurisdictions on the HIT, because we know that addressing our regional affordable housing challenges will require a portfolio approach and policies in all areas to preserve existing affordability, to produce more housing, and to protect people from discrimination and displacement. On this table, we highlight a few of the ones we've been tracking over the last couple of years. Nearly all jurisdictions have homebuyer assistance programs, and most in the DC region have a policy to prioritize affordable housing near transit. And on the next slide. Last year's survey, we expanded our policy questions to include a series related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and energy costs in housing and protecting vulnerable residents from the impacts of climate-related events. To highlight a few of those, 14 jurisdictions across the 2 regions provided funding or tax subsidies to help homeowners make their homes more energy efficient, which reduces energy cost burden as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And 10 have a climate action plan, and those plans contain goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate risk, as well as actions that the jurisdictions can take to achieve those goals. And I think we're going back to Taylor now.
Thank you, Leah. I really appreciate that recap of where we've been. And to kind of round out this reflection and like overview portion, excited to have a couple of housing directors who have been involved in the HIT just to share their perspective and their experience. So first we have Terry Hickey, and he is the director of the Baltimore County Department of Housing and Community Development, and a newer addition to the HIT from last year. Hi, Terry.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I'd love just if you could spend a few minutes just sharing your reflections on the HIT. So what made you decide to participate, and what value has it provided for you? And are there any lessons learned that you would point to? And the room is other housing directors or folks who would be a part of this, collecting some of this data. So the floor is yours, Terry.
All right. Well, I'll be brief. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Terry Hickey with Baltimore County DHCD, joined by my Deputy Director, Ashley Johnson-Hare, who's here as well. Just want to thank Taylor and Courtney for the invitation. It's always nice to be late to the party and still get an invitation to the next one. We were fairly late entrance into this. We're a fairly new DHCD. Baltimore County's not traditionally had a housing department. We were formed in 2021. Thrilled to be a part of this conversation. And, as the tool gets expanded throughout the region, housing is such a regional issue, but we tend to look at it in such a silo. And I think not just being a part of the HIT, but being a part of these more regional discussions of housing was a really big deal for us. So just a few things to key in on. To be blunt, and you've seen some of the numbers that were just shown. Baltimore County is not a local jurisdiction that's historically been focused on affordable housing production for a number of reasons. Many of our land use and zoning procedures are not really development friendly, although they're getting better. And our lack of progress historically led to the signing of a voluntary compliance agreement with HUD that requires us to do so many hard units over a 12-year period. That's great when you quantify it in terms of that. But the HIT, we agreed to participate last year. Ashley had brought it up. She was familiar with the tool, with Hand's work. We decided it really made a lot of sense to put our numbers out there and use those as a baseline so that we could actually talk about what progress looked like in a much bigger term than what we had agreed to with HUD, which was really black and white number of hard units. I will say this, it wasn't the easiest lift in the beginning as you're working on getting a lot of the data into the right format, but that in and of itself was really a good process. One example, Ashley worked with our permits division in order to pull building permits for the preceding year, which I think is an important part of the tool. Our permits department was using a different system. It was harder to access. The data points didn't line up. I want to shout out Urban Institute for being a great partner, helping provide support and TA to help us get our data there. I think one of my tips for the future is we're going to involve our whole BC Stat team and a dedicated data analyst to support Ashley in getting through the survey this year. It's really important to make sure that you're on top of the data you provide, that it's clean, that it aligns so that you can get real results. I think more broadly, we're very happy we participated, although I will say it was a little uncomfortable and even painful in the beginning to see your numbers out there and to see where historically maybe we haven't made progress. But you have to have a baseline. And if you want to have real conversations with elected officials, community leaders, particularly in regions where there hasn't been as much of a focus on affordability, and we're a suburban jurisdiction, lots of single family homes, it really brought our own situation into focus, and it allowed us to compare us to other jurisdictions to show what was being done and where we needed to focus limited resources. I also want to commend Hand that the HIT tool doesn't just focus on these outcomes. It looks at equity, the ability to focus on homeownership in addition to rental, being able to look at this quantification of structural racism, looking at credit denials, homeownership rates, housing cost burden. It allows us to have these more complex conversations with stakeholders in the county about things like the impact of structural racism by breaking it down into numbers that people can understand and look at and say, oh, okay, I wasn't sure about that, but I get this. And it allows us to really structure these functional conversations. And I'll end on this. We're doing stakeholder conversations with leaders right now around the county with Dr. Tiffany Manuel and her team at CaseMade. And we're able to use some of these numbers and data for us to kind of level set with people as they're talking about their thoughts on housing in the county, much more broadly than just envisioning the hard units themselves. And it becomes a much more thoughtful conversation. So for all those reasons, I think it's been a great involvement for us, and we're really looking forward to jumping back in even more in this upcoming year. So thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That was great. We did not pay him for that, by the way. So really appreciate you sharing those reflections and just the HIT, how it's helped in terms of breaking down silos, digging deeper into what progress looks like, and operationalizing equity in terms of how you think about moving beyond the sticks and bricks, if you will, of like hard numbers and more holistic picture of what progress looks like. So really appreciate you sharing that. Very grateful that you joined when you did. You're not late to the party by any means. And next we will have Aspasia Zapolia, and she is the director of the Prince George's County Department of Housing and Community Development. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Great. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. And I will kind of set the stage in the same way. I would love to hear a little bit about why you decide to participate in the HIT, value it's provided, or even, lessons learned along the way.
Mhm. No, thank you. And I think we all feel we are late to the party because if the issue was easy and it would have been solved, there will be no party. So I think for everybody who has touched housing in their careers, affordable housing, they know that the issue is so big and it is regional, it's not local. So from a practitioner's point of view, it was very refreshing to see HAND push that hard for that regional approach. And accountability at the local level, but also at the regional level. So that was very refreshing. It is scary to see the numbers because we're not meeting them. And if we were meeting them again, there will be no party. But there is a reason for that. It's not a lack of interest. It's not a lack of commitment and desire to actually meet these numbers. It's because there are real barriers that we all have to collectively understand in order to solve. So from a big picture, like affordable housing practitioner's perspective, it just made sense. There is no good reason of not participating. What I found the most useful for us was that until a few years ago, in Prince George's County, there was a very strong narrative about the fact that we have already a lot of affordable housing and hence we don't need any more. And we actually dug into the HIT tool and the data that you all provide that are accessible and free to local governments online to make the case of how this is not true and to explain the difference between what is a naturally occurring affordable housing and what is committed affordable housing, how naturally occurring affordable housing is subject to be lost, and how committed affordable housing also means quality housing. So it was very helpful from where I sat on the table to be able to access this data and make this case to our constituents, elected officials, and a few years ago, even to our OMB, because a few years ago, the Prince George's County actually set up a designated funding source for our Housing Investment Trust Fund. So it really gave a lot of teeth and a lot of credibility behind this local effort that we were launching. So we're very excited to be part of that. When the results come out every year, it's bittersweet because I always get calls about why you didn't meet that and this and the other. And I do go back to all of those tools that we don't have in our toolbox yet. And some of those tools are not tools that you can have at a local toolbox. We need, in order, for example, to create extremely low-income housing, you need project-based subsidy. And we point to DC because we are able to show that from HIT's tool that they have that at the local level, and we don't have that at the state level. And so it's a really very good tool in doubling down on the policy decisions that we make at all levels of government and explaining why some trends look like the way they are. And as you know, in local government, it's very hard sometimes to pay consultants to give you that good data. So the fact that this information is available online and has behind it the credibility of HAND and Urban is really very valuable in all the push we are trying to do at the local level. So I look forward to continue learning from you. I know that we have Pam Wilson on our team who is working very closely with all of you on the next round of data. And I know she's going through those growing pains, but one of the things that we had that made us do is create our own dashboard. So now we don't have to run around once a year to collect some data. We actually maintain it in our website and we show projects in our pipeline and projects that have been completed. So I look forward to see how this evolves the next few years. And I do want to thank you for putting all this push behind it because it's very valuable to local governments.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's one thing to talk about how it could be used, but to give those real tangible examples of how you're using it in real time to educate, to casemate, and also, to hold Prince George's County, your work, your team accountable. And I think it's scary, as you mentioned. I might have been on mute. Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing about how you use the tool to casemate, to educate, and for accountability. I know it's not easy to air out what progress has or hasn't been made, but it's the first step to really creating change. So appreciate you for sharing that. So thank you again to Director Zapolia, Director Hickey, Deputy Director Hare that's on the line. Really appreciate your partnership. And with that, I will turn it back over to Leah with the Urban Institute team to share more about this year's survey. We also have Elizabeth Burton and Rodrigo Garcia. And I will turn it over to you, Leah.
Great. And Tiana, if you can bring back the slides. Thank you. And it was great to hear that the survey has helped prompted better data practices from jurisdictions. So thank you for sharing that as well. But first, I just wanted to start by reiterating what Courtney and Taylor mentioned. We thank all of you for your work to fill out the survey. We know it is a lot of work, and hopefully this webinar will help answer some questions, and we are happy to answer further questions via email or phone as we get closer to the due date. So if you go to the next slide. Just to go through the timeline, we reviewed the survey content with HAND this fall and made some refinements to a couple of questions, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I'm sure many of you will be pleased to know that there are no new questions this year. Someone in your jurisdiction should have received an email from my colleague, Rodrigo Garcia, on December 4th, that was last Monday, with the survey attached as an Excel file. If you didn't get this email and you think you should have, or you helped complete it last year and weren't on the email, please send Rodrigo or anyone on the HAND or Urban team an email, and we can follow up to make sure we get you connected with that. We have the survey due on January 22nd, so that we can launch the revised HIT towards the middle of March. So we'll be spending a lot of time processing and analyzing all that data in January and February. If you go to the next slide. The survey remains largely the same, including the same sections and layout. For those who are new, the survey has 3 major sections, one on production, one on preservation, and then one on policies. The production section does require quantitative data on the number of building permits, the number of units built, and building addresses with the number of new affordable units by AMI level. The preservation section asks for data on affordable units preserved with subsidies, as well as those that might be considered naturally occurring or otherwise or unsubsidized, but affordable housing, and were preserved with some sort of commitment for affordability going forward. So we do collect the building addresses on those and the AMI levels. And then there's a policy section which asks about many different policies that I talked about in the earlier review of last year's HIT. And one of the things we do when we send out the survey, if you answered last year, we give you a copy of your policy responses from the previous year. So if nothing has changed about that policy, you can just copy over that information. All right, and then we removed questions this year on public housing or voucher waitlists, as well as the questions that were related to the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program. We also eliminated a couple of sub-questions for the emergency rental assistance. I wanted to note we tweaked 2 questions that were added last year. And we can maybe send out a note with more specifics, but one is in row 113 on flood insurance and one on row 100 on incentives for green building for affordable housing. We clarified what we were looking for to make those questions more useful for everyone. And then we tweaked the sub-question on the rental assistance demonstration program, which is row 90. And I'm gonna, if you go to the next slide, I'll also ask my colleagues, Rodrigo and Elizabeth, to come on camera. I want to acknowledge they do the lion's share of the work on gathering and analyzing the data, and they can jump in if I miss any of the tips. So we do encourage everyone to start early. Most of the policy questions can probably be completed now. We would also encourage people to flag the survey and the data elements for other departments that they may need to coordinate with to complete the survey. Depending on your jurisdiction, this might include your planning, housing, human services departments, and the housing authority. you go to the next slide. I want to briefly review a couple of the survey elements that we tend to get the most questions on. First is building permits. We are asking about two separate things. One is the number of building permits for new construction. And then the second is the number of units that were permitted through those permits. And then we ask both about the total number of units and if they were multifamily units. And then the second group is on the number of new units built. This is one of our key indicators for the HIT that we're reporting out on. And we are looking to understand both the total new units built as well as we ask for the total new multifamily units. And multifamily, we're considering apartments and condos. Townhomes, we would consider single family. And then we calculate the single family number by subtracting. And of course, we also then ask about the new committed affordable units by AMI level. And those are our quick tips. But we will go to Q&A, I think, now. So if folks have specific questions, we can bring up the survey if that's needed, but we're happy to weigh in on anything.
Thank you, Leah. Yes, we'll be moving to Q&A. So you can, on Zoom, there is the Q&A box, so you can put your question there and we can answer it. And we'll give folks a few minutes in case there are questions that were not answered through this presentation.
And as I said, you can reach out to any one of us if you have questions that come up as you're going through the survey. So this was
Yes,
definitely not your last
definitely.
opportunity.
Not at all. This is the beginning. Feel free to reach out to any of us via email and we can help answer any more targeted questions you have. Righty. Well, I guess if there are no questions, I'll pause for the urban team if there are any other areas that sometimes might trip people up or any other advice final advice you would share as people start to update the survey.
Elizabeth, is there anything with the way the individual units when they're reporting on the committed affordable or preserved units? You can always add more lines to the survey if you have more buildings to report out on.
Alrighty. I'm
Yeah.
not seeing any.
I'll just note that the AMI, it asks for individual addresses and then at the level of AMI, and that it totals on the Excel spreadsheet that we created. So no need to do that math yourself once you've already inputted that data.
Alrighty. Okay. Well, with that, Tiana, can you pull up the last slide? Looking ahead, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being a part of this process. If you're new, if you've been here for a while, we're excited to have you and continue in partnership. Looking ahead, please make sure that you receive the survey. If you haven't seen it, please reach out. It would have come from rgarcia@urban.org. Responses are due January 22nd. And you could start now, particularly on the policy section as you wait for other data to finish and come in, and reach out to us with any questions and get excited for the HIT launch. The date will be announced very soon, but it'll be in the spring. And with that, just want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you, Director Hickey, Director Zapolia. Thank you to our urban team, and thank you to you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. Just echo Taylor's remarks. And also, one more note, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar. So please feel free to distribute that to your colleagues as well. Thank you.
Alrighty. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.